Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the third session of our Cyber Business Uplift series. Firstly, I'd like to do a quick acknowledgement of country. So although we're meeting virtually, we continue to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that have for thousands of years walked upon and cared for the lands upon which we're all individually located today. We acknowledge the continued deep spiritual attachment and relationship of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to this country and commit ourselves to the ongoing journey of reconciliation. So like I said earlier, this is our third session of the Cyber Business Uplift series, which is brought to you in collaboration between Western Sydney Community Forum and the New South Wales Cybersecurity Innovation Node. My name is Charlton and I'm from the Western Sydney Community Forum. Now, you notice that I still have this opening slide on. What I want everybody to do quickly is to quickly jump onto menti.com using the code 445499. Now, what this is just a quick poll on understanding what your understanding is, so we can gauge an understanding of where you are now and after our hour together. Now, I'd like to quickly say hello to both our audience on Zoom as well as our friends on YouTube. Now, while I'm doing this, just a quick bit of housekeeping. Now, this is an open session, so feel free to ask any questions during our session today, either by raising your hand on your mobile device here on Zoom, or feel free to put your answers in writing in the Q&A tab. Now, also for our friends on YouTube, I'll also be monitoring the live chat window, so feel free to pop your questions in there, and I'm more than happy to ask them live on air as well. Now, what I'll quickly do is I'll stop my share so that I can introduce a bit more of this session. Now, our session today is on phishing. So as much as I want to find out what the best tackle to use for netting a big fish, I know it's a low-hanging fruit of a joke, but I had to take it anyway. But this is about us as organizations and consumers being the fish taking the bait. So, but firstly, I'd like to welcome Dr. Stephenie Andal from the New South Wales Cybersecurity Innovation Node to share a few words and as well as introduce our expert on phishing today. Take it away, Stephenie.
Great, thanks, Charlton. I'm Stephenie Andal. I'm from the New South Wales Cybersecurity Innovation Node, and it's really a pleasure for us today to be collaborating together with Charlton and the team at Western Sydney Community Forum to be delivering this seminar series that's really designed to bring some cyber business uplift to local businesses in Western Sydney. Our organization is a government-based initiative that our mandate is really to grow cybersecurity awareness across Australia, but particularly New South Wales. So it's really a treat for us today to be joining all of you. And it's my pleasure to be having Merimetso today, delivering the content of today's topic. I know the team from Merimetso very well. They're a fantastic local cybersecurity company that the New South Wales Node is really proud to support. And they specialize in a lot of different pieces across the cybersecurity space, but at heart, they're really passionate cyber educators, and they provide training across a number of cybersecurity fields. A lot of their courses are university accredited, and they do lead to formally recognized qualifications. So we're really lucky today to have them imparting their knowledge and expertise to the audience. Speaking on their behalf today will be Campbell Murray, who is the founder and COO of the company. And I have to flag that Campbell is actually joining us from the UK, and it is a bloody who knows whatever time in the middle of the night in the UK at the moment. So he's being a complete trooper by joining us, and if he starts to yawn or fall asleep during his talk, I will be sure to try to crack the whip some way virtually if I can. But just a little bit of information on Campbell. Campbell is an established global leader in the field of information security, and he's got over 25 years experience across the cybersecurity sector and a range of different environments. So he's got a lot of insight into the whole sort of grab bag as it comes to cybersecurity. I could talk a lot about all of his background, but he has been working at BlackBerry for the last couple of years. I'm Canadian, so I'll always go hoo-hoo when I hear the word BlackBerry. And he was been there for the last 4 years until he decided to focus on Merimetso. So I think with that, I will leave it over to Campbell, who I know has got a great session for us. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephenie. I'll just get my screen share going. There we go. So assuming everybody can see all of that, hi there, thanks for joining the session. Thanks for the introduction, Stephenie. I'm not going to repeat everything Stephenie said, but just so you know, I was the global head of cybersecurity delivery at BlackBerry. I came to BlackBerry by acquisition when they bought my company, which was Encryption Limited, back in 2016. And as Stephenie's already mentioned, I've been working in information security about 25 years. I came from a related government role into commercial and providing consultancy engagements around 2000. So I've been knocking around for a while. Got quite a few slides, and if we've got time, I'm going to do a little demo for you as well. I'm going to try and get through all of this content in 22 to 25 minutes. So Stephenie, if I'm running over, please let me know and I'll accelerate. Today we're going to be talking about phishing. Really, what is it? What are the terms around it? How does it work? And we're going to take you through the mechanics of how a successful phishing attack will actually occur, what kind of processes are in place, how attackers identify their targets, for example. But the term phishing is relatively new. There's a bit of debate about when it was first used, sometime 95 or 96, so potentially 25 years it's been around. It was first termed around Bank of America scams in early AOL forums, and the term phishing came about because of their email laws. We're trying to catch people, and hackers never spell anything correctly. So, of course, it's spelled PH. Is it going away? Certainly not. It's, as Charlton mentioned earlier, it's pretty low-hanging fruit. A recent Mimecast poll suggests that 85% of organizations believe the volume of phishing will remain the same or increase. It's a very easy attack to undertake, has a pretty high success rate, but it falls into a category of what we call social engineering. Phishing in itself is part of a wider group of activities. So what's social engineering? Well, the Oxford Dictionary, forgive me for being British, couldn't find any other reference for this, says it's the use of deception to manipulate individuals, but specifically says to gain information that may be used for fraudulent purposes. But there's an awful lot more to it than that, because phishing is not just about obtaining your information for identity theft. Phishing refers to the act of obtaining sensitive information about your organization, whatever the target, whatever the attack pattern that the social engineers who are using phishing as an attack vector will be aiming for. So how does it work? So I'll get through this very quickly. There's a lot of psychology behind social engineering, but to put it as simply as I can, it works because people undergo a lifetime of conditioning. This is a bit controversial, and when I'm delivering this kind of content to people, I often get a bit of pushback, but I'll cover that in a minute. When you're a child, you do what your parents tell you to do, you go to school, you do what your teachers tell you to do, you go to college, yeah, you got a bit of freedom, but when you get a job, you do what your boss tells you to do. We are conditioned through our entire lives to follow instructions and to be helpful for people. If we take that principle and we back it up with something else called pretexting, being its technical term, with pretexting, you're more likely to believe something you've heard before. Now, these are the two primary psychological principles behind why social engineering works. And I'll give you an example of pretexting in a social engineering context. So say you work for company ABC. I phone you up and I say, hello, company ABC. I'm from XYZ Plumbers. We do HVAC. Are you happy with your suppliers? And you say, yeah, company ABC says, yes, yeah, we're absolutely fine. Do you mind me asking who your suppliers are? Go, okay, well, we use DEF. So I put down the phone. A couple of days later, I phone up and say, this is Bob from DEF. We need to service one of your thermostats. So Campbell will be coming in to do that on Thursday morning. And guess what? I've pretexted you. You're expecting me to come. So when I turn up and say, I'm from DEF Engineering, you know I'm coming and you're going to let me straight through. So that's how social engineering works. By relying on people being helpful, by being polite, by saying, I'm here to do a job, reception and any other kind of facility staff, and say, oh yeah, we were expecting you, come on through, I'll probably be left alone. Now, I've used that particular social engineering trick very successfully dozens of times. It does work. And phishing uses the same principles. So there's a lot written about phishing and how it works. There's organizations out there have made it into an art form. You can go on a week-long course about how to do social engineering, but it always comes down to three basic factors, which rely on the human conditioning and partly that pretexting mode as well. There are only ever three factors that we identify in a phishing attempt, and these are compliance, trust, and benefit. I'll give you an example. When I deliver this content, I sometimes get pushback. And it's generally from people going, nobody tells me what to do. Yeah, oh yeah, I'd identify that. But then I ask them one simple question. So, okay, if I came in the room now, dressed as a fireman, and told you all to get up and evacuate, what would you do? Well, of course, you'd follow orders. Compliance, trust, and benefit. Compliance, I'm issuing you a direct instruction. Trust, I look like a fireman. And generally, fireys are, well liked, well trusted, and if I look the part, you've got no reason to doubt me. And the benefit to you is that if you follow my instructions, you might not burn to death. Compliance, trust, and benefit. We see this in every social engineering. This is really breaking it down to its very basic concepts. So we're going to have a look at a phishing email now, and I should have time to do you a demo because we're getting through this at quite a good rate. So here's one I've written, and I've written it specifically for you guys because it's for an Australian audience. And this is a pattern of social engineering and phishing that I've used successfully. Now, I can tell you, I stopped doing it a while ago, but I used to maintain ongoing statistics around phishing campaigns. And we as professionals are often invited in by companies to say, I want to check the security awareness of my organization. Can you run some social engineering campaigns? So this is where I'm getting into buildings, dressed as Campbell, the HVAC engineer, and these phishing campaigns, I can tell you, using this format, we got on average over a 10-year span, 47% of username and password combinations from the recipients that we sent it to. That's 47% of all recipients responded to this and gave us their login credentials unwittingly. So if we run through it very quickly, there's a couple of things here that we need to delve into. So we start by compliance. We are issuing a direct instruction. So we're telling you to follow the link below, log in and verify your details are accurate. Compliance, there's your instruction. Trust, I'm going to spoof somebody whose name you may or may not know. Jamie Norton, I went on LinkedIn and said, Australian Tax Office, look for the people, pick Jamie Norton because he's the CISO. Right? And we're saying that we're doing this to ensure your continued security benefit. But there's an additional benefit here as well, because we actually push a little bit further with the compliance by saying that if you have not undertaken this action by 12 p.m. on Friday, an agent will call you directly. So we have compliance, we're making it look real, and I'll talk about this link in just a moment. Trust, we're making it sound believable, and benefit. Clearly, you don't want to be bothered by somebody phoning you up, and you don't want your taxes to be wrong. You don't want, it's got everything in there that smacks of a social engineering attempt. However, if we look at this link that I provided, it's obviously false. However, ato.gov.au is the correct link. However, ato.gov.id.au, if you read that quickly, if I put it in a different font, or if I obfuscated the link in some way, it's not immediately smacks at you as being, this is an attempt at fraud. I've done everything I can for trust here. Now that domain, interestingly enough, is available to buy. So I could actually go and register that domain and launch phishing attacks against the Australian population using that as my pretext and my compliance, trust, benefit triad. And I can guarantee you I'll get quite a lot of respondents to this. But I get people to click that link. What are they going to do with it? How quickly can I spoof a website? And how quickly can scammers spoof a website? I'm going to go ahead and do the demo because I think we've got time. And it's very, very, very easy to spoof a website. So I'm just going to drop the presentation now because I need to show a couple of other things. Right, so let's get a web browser up. So first of all, I'm going to select my target. So I'm going to type Tax Office Australia, ato.gov.uk. That's great. Now I've got a domain. I'm going to go back to Google and I'm going to use a modifier for Google, not very well known. Clean it up. Oops. Click return by mistake. Live demos. Always stressful. But what I'm looking for here, I need a login screen. Ah, here we go, this will do. With my gov.id login. which is slow to load, not helpful. Obviously, the demo gods are not smiling on me today. Come on. Okay, that's not a login. That's spoof this page anyway. Let's just pretend this was a login. So to spoof this page, all I need to do is grab this page source. I'm now going to get a text editor up. I'm going to paste that in there. And I need to add one little thing. So I'm just going to grab the base domain. Go back to my text editor. Helps if you so I can type. Now, this always goes so smoothly when nobody's watching, right? So all I've done is I've added a simple HTML tag into this. Now I'm just going to save this page. Just going to save it as untitled. Yeah, untitled to my desktop. That's fine. Let's just replace that. I'm obviously doing one earlier because I've already got one there. So now I'm just going to go find that untitled page. I'm going to open it. Still loading. Come on. Okay, there's something funky about this page. I've chosen a not good one to do, which is not great. I'll tell you what, let's do another one quickly because we've got time.
Press R. Select L, T. Google.com search Q equals Australian plus Elton RLZ equal. Voiceover off.
I don't know where that came from. Let's try the Australian Department of Health. Yeah, this one looks better. So let's take that side. I'll just repeat the process. Yeah. Right, that's better. We've got a login screen now. This is a better one. So I'll just do the same process again. Simply copy that. Put it into my text editor. Make that one simple change. health.gov.au. You'd thought I'd learned by now not to do live demos. I've just saved that back where it was. So refreshing this should give us, there we go. So it's a complete, perfect copy of the login from health. Now, using this, now I know I can clone this site quickly and easily. I can modify this form field. I can send you links, say, please log in, COVID-19 information, lots of different ways of doing it. But that's how quick and simple it is to spoof a website. So let's just get back to presentation. And I just need to take this out of presenter mode so I can see what I'm doing. Okay. So phishing is part of social engineering. We've established that. There's more to social engineering than just phishing. There are several different types of phishing as well. Spear phishing is a targeted attack against an individual or a group of individuals, and that we're being more focused, whereas phishing really refers to a widespread campaign. Vishing is another phrase that you'll come across, and that's video phishing or voice phishing. It can be either. And that's be where I phone you up and I impersonate a member of staff, somebody from IT, and I obtain information from you over the phone. And whaling is a term that's used to describe where we go for typically C-suite, members of an organization. So we're going for the CEO, the CISO, the chief financial officer, because we're trying to land a big fish. And so in that context, we use the phrase whaling. Well, how do you defend against phishing? There are some technical solutions out there. There's a lot of stuff you can buy. There's a lot of magic bullets being sold. Nothing's guaranteed to stop phishing. A lot of public services are free to use services like Google Mail, Yahoo Mail, for example. They do a pretty good job at identifying, using heuristic analysis and artificial intelligence, looking for those patterns for what is suspicious. So they're looking for the compliance trust benefit, the urgency in the text, and they're using real-time language processing to do that. And they're pretty good, but they're not guaranteed to work. They're never going to work. The Australian Essential 8 maturity model, if you've not seen it already, covers some items there. I'm not going to go into that in too much detail, but we are going to look at the important parts of that. So in relation to phishing, from your Essential 8, there are 3 specific pillars, for want of a better word for them, that address phishing. Disabling office macros, for a start, because phishing can be large, it can be user interactive, whereby we're using pre-texting to get you to click a link and perform an action. But if you're using Microsoft products, we can send you things like Word documents with active macros in, which can perform some actions on your machine and just report back with no user interaction. So controlling office macros is very, very important. Restricting privileges is not just an anti-phishing mechanism. The principle of least privilege is one of the foundations of all security practices, not just information security. So to give you an example of why it's so important, if I phish you and I get your username and password, I can only do what that account is allowed to do. So that account should have the minimum privilege necessary to perform the actions that are relative to the role that that account is for. If everybody's got domain administrator rights on your network, and I've got a great big wide open field of people I can phish and gain those level of privileges. So it's very important to maintain a register of privileges for all users. And multi-factor authentication pretty much kills phishing dead if you're using dual factor or multi-factor authentication. Because although I may be able to get your credentials and some information, if I don't have your second factor, which might be SMS, might be RSA tokens, it might be YubiKeys, many, many different ways of doing multi-factor authentication. If I don't have that second part of the puzzle, I can't go anywhere with your credentials. So multi-factor authentication is something that you know, which will be your username and password, and something that you have. Could be a phone, could be a RSA fob, lots of different ways of doing it. And if you're not employing multi-factor authentication, it's simpler to deploy than you might think. And please, speak to your local IT suppliers about getting it installed if you're not using it already. Other advice that we can give you is vigilance at all times and user education. So obviously, a lot of organizations do security awareness training. It tends to be done once a year or when a new employee starts. However, really, with building a culture around user education, it needs to be drip fed. People need to be reminded constantly, not every 5 minutes, but could be once a week, could be posters around the office that are changed regularly, could be just an email update saying, guys, just remember, the phishers are out there, the social engineers are trying to get us. Doesn't matter if you think you're a target or not, if they can get it, they will. But when we talk about culture, something that's very important is that it's got to be okay to fail. Now, a lot of high value and high media coverage events have happened simply because somebody was phished. Suspected they might have been really phished, but were too embarrassed to say anything about it. It's okay to fail. Phishing is very, very hard to defend against. And if you do click a link, fill in your details on a website, and then later on think, maybe I shouldn't have done that, go and talk to somebody. And that's why you have to have an incident response plan. But that incident response plan won't come into effect if you don't know, and the culture of your organization is not that tell us about it, no consequences, no reprimands, and celebrate the people who do come forward and go, I made a mistake, I was phished, let me tell you about my experience, let's make it all better. And that's a cultural issue really across a lot of organizations. Very difficult one to deal with, getting people to admit their mistakes and their accidents, but if we can get there, it would be the utopia of information security if everybody held up their hands and admitted their limitations. So is phishing the same as spam? So spam is a massive problem, and there's a key learning piece in here. About 6 billion spam emails sent every day. But why? Why are you still getting adverts for dodgy pharmaceutical products in your inbox? And again, identifying spam again with those email providers and a lot of systems, they're pretty good at it. Some does get through. But why, if we can block a lot of it, do people persist in sending spam? Well, it's often used to find susceptible people. Plus, if I'm sending 6 billion emails a day, I only need a handful of people to click my links, go to my fraudulent website for it to be profitable for me. But identifying people via spam links, they get added to a very, very special list of people who are susceptible to that kind of manipulation, because 80% of people who've had their identity stolen will fall victim again, because there's a particular mindset of that group of individuals. So responding to spam is just as dangerous as responding to phishing. If you do respond to a spam email, you'll suddenly find an increase in traffic. And you can try this. You can create a throwaway email account, post it up online or a forum somewhere, go click some links in the spam emails you will inevitably start receiving about 48 hours later, and then see how much the volume of spam suddenly increases after you start following those links. And you can do that as an experiment at home, and then trash that email account. Yeah. So that's in about 23 minutes, a run through on my slides. So we're now into QA. So does anybody have any questions? And I'll hand back over to Charlton.
Thank you very much, Campbell. Very, very fascinating insight. And I'd also like to bring Stephenie up as well, and then we can kind of bring this to a kind of group discussion as well. Campbell, if you don't mind, I ask you to stop your share so we can kind of see everybody on screen. Thank you very much. And so we've actually got a couple of questions already, and thank you very much, Teresa, for providing so many questions. So the first one that Teresa asked is, if I don't click on a link, but copy and paste it into my browser, would I still get phished? Yes.
Clicking on the link can, and this is why we disable macros, clicking the link, the action, can enable other actions in the background in your Office suite, but just copying and pasting it will be the same as going to the website.
And is that the same, say, if I copy and paste that into, say, a text document that's not linked to anything?
Yeah, if you copy and paste it into a text document, it just becomes ASCII text. It's pretty benign. But if you do then copy and paste that link into the browser and go to that website, then yeah, you've still undertaken the user implied action of visiting the phishing site. So if you suspect it's a phishing link, trash it. There are other ways you can visit phishing sites safely. I will say now, incognito mode in any browser is not safe mode. It implies no safety. It just means that the actions are not recorded locally. You can't browse the internet anonymously using incognito mode, despite what the name implies. All it does is it just doesn't write changes to your local system. So going to a phishing site in incognito mode is the same, has the same implications as going in your full-blown browser as well.
Thanks, Campbell. So the second question from Teresa is, if I clicked that link, unfortunately, what are the steps that I should take to start repairing the damage?
Well, hopefully your organization will have an incident response plan. And that incident response plan will start with what we call a calling tree. So it applies to every level of the organization. The incident response plan must be easily available to every employee, be that on a credit card size thing, on your desk, possibly you have something in your wallet, or on a share on the network, which is linked to and is easily accessible, so that you can go to that and say, right, at the top, calling tree, I'm at this part of the organization, I need to call them and inform them. And that should then kick off the incident response plan. Like I say, it's okay to fail. Phishing is incredibly effective. Like I said, my stats are 47% success over 10 years. That's tens of thousands of people. That's hundreds and hundreds of logins that I've obtained with permission as part of a security audit campaign, of course, no illegal activity. Just to show how effective it is, and good phishers and social engineers will be successful. And it's okay to say, I made a mistake, I got caught. And that incident response plan will be tailored and bespoke to each individual organization. If you don't have one, it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of document, because it will depend on your organizational structure, what kind of skills and expertise. If you're using external consultants, who do you phone is the first step in any incident response plan. And that needs to be clearly labeled. So if you do suspect that, pick up the phone, speak to your security team, IT, your manager, whoever is in that calling tree. But that incident response plan needs to be laid out so that it's effective and streamlined for your individual organizational structure.
Can I interrupt at that point? I guess while you're speaking on that, Campbell, is there any sort of first steps that you can provide to people as it comes to formulating an incident response plan? If they're working within an organization that doesn't have one developed or is literally thinking, that sounds great, I need it, but how on earth would I begin to go about undertaking that?
Yeah, and I think that's also a great segue to one of our anonymous attendees who asked, I'm not in an organization with an incident response plan. I'm a sole trader. What do I do?
Okay, well, as a sole trader, you're not going to phone yourself up, obviously. You need to, well, number one, I'll deal with the first question that's definitely related there. So there are online available frameworks that you can reference. You have the ISO standards of 27001. A lot of that information is freely available. And obviously getting something like ISO 27001 accredited is a lengthy and expensive process. It's not for everyone. You have to start by defining your ISMS is the first step, your information security management system, which is looking at everything that you want to include in your protected box. Some assets you've got simply aren't going to be in there. Say if a company vehicle gets broken into, it's not really information security. Yeah, there are implications, but it's not necessarily going to be part of your ISMS. So you can look up the ISO 27001 standards, and there's advice there on incident response planning. And you will find some template documents that you can modify. The NIST framework as well, the US NIST framework, that's November, Indigo, Sierra, Tango. They have the pillars, the DDPRR pillars, which is a good place to start as well. So just Googling online for incident response plans, ISMS, for these terms, you'll start to find some really, really useful resources. I don't want to specifically give you one because one is not necessarily going to be right for you. In the case of a sole trader, if you do find yourself phished, you can make yourself a simple incident response plan. Obviously, you've got nobody to report it to, but you should have, and if you're not using one now, especially if you're a sole trader, you must have a password manager. Very, very important. Don't try and remember all your passwords, and you certainly won't be using the same password for every service. But what a password manager would do, so it's a piece of software that securely stores your passwords for you. You can go through and say, right, where have I used that username and password? Go and change the password on all those accounts if you think you've compromised your own username and password. And that can be your incident response plan. It can be as simple as that. I suspect I've been phished. I'm not happy about this. Go and change your passwords and make sure you get dual factor authentication and multi-factor authentication in place as well. So if you're using something like Google Suite, as an example, not saying that's the one to use, it's a click of a button to turn on dual factor authentication. So every time you log in, your phone goes buzz and it asks you, are you logging in? So if your details are compromised, without that second factor, nobody can go anywhere. And for organizations, and this is, you can reference this, you can Google it, and the reason I use the G Suite as an example is because last summer, they ran an experiment whereby they enabled dual factor authentication by default for all organizations using their suite of productivity tools. It stopped phishing 100%, just stopped it in its tracks. So even though it stopped compromise, so it doesn't stop, nothing's ever going to stop phishing, right? But it stopped compromise of phished accounts, 100%. And that's a news article, you can go and look that one up. So there are things you can do as a sole trader, and getting that incident response plan in place. There's lots of resources out there that'll help you do it. If you've got the budget, there are plenty of GRC, the term you're looking for is governance, risk and compliance, GRC, risk management consultancies out there who will be able to give you advice that are at a fairly reasonable cost if that's in your budget.
I'd also probably recommend the Australian Government Office of Australian Information Commission. They provide quite a lot of information, especially around, but more so around data breaches, but will also give handy tips and advice, as well as obviously the New South Wales Cybersecurity Innovation Node. Just quick plug. So we've got another question here from Teresa, which is the third question, which is around macros. When you were talking about macros earlier. So why is macros a problem for phishing? If we cannot do without macros, they're needed for automating tasks, particularly in Excel. What would you suggest as best practice?
Yeah, they're super useful. Macros are very powerful. Visual Basic automation language is used in the back, and it can do an awful lot of stuff. If you, that again, it comes down to that privilege. piece. So ideally we want to disable macros if possible, but if you are using them, you need to ensure that the accounts in your domain that's running those tools has the least privilege possible on that login, so that it can't do things like create a responder. I'll tell you what a responder is. It's a simple listener, and we can write this in VBA, build it into a macro. You open a Word document, and that Word document is listening on your network for NTLM hashes. Now, a hash is a one-way encrypted copy of passwords that are being sent across the network while different users log in. But we can create a responder which says, I'm a Windows service, come and log in to me. And that way we can grab NTLM hashes, upload them up to the attacker where we can decrypt them, get usernames and passwords. It's a very common attack, and one that we use in pen testing and assessing networks, is that, you know, really there shouldn't be these hashes being passed around the network, but default behavior in a Windows domain is to use NTLM hashes for authentication and re-authentication. There's an example of what we can use a macro for, but if your machine doesn't have the permissions to modify the network card settings, doesn't have any system permissions in the user context, then I can't run that good stuff in the macros, and you'll still be able to use your macros. So a bit of a technical answer, I know, but hopefully that was clear.
Thanks, Campbell. Just to respond quickly to one question was around, can I get a list of the answer to the information? So this was in regards to ISO and GRC and a list of other terms. What we'll be doing is sending across information across to everybody here today with some of the stuff that Campbell's talked about, as well as some of the links from us that us and the New South Wales Innovation Node, just places that you can access further information. And if Campbell, if you don't mind, we'll probably send through your presentation as well.
Oh yeah, fine.
Yeah.
I have a question coming through, if I can interrupt. I'm just interested in what the ATO did to make it difficult to spoof their site easily. Do you have any insight into that, Campbell?
I'd have to have a look at it. I suspect I probably didn't copy and paste it properly, if I'm honest. I thought I'd try another one quickly. There are some protections you can do, preventing, it's called cross-site origin blocking, which can limit, but there's very, very simple ways around it. So you can set on your web server, you can prevent cross-site origin, which means that I can't pull in the cross-domain referrer parts of the website. Yep. But all I need to do is remove that code from my copy paste and paste it back in, and it all works. You know, it's not exactly a great protection. So yeah, every site can be spoofed. Nothing anybody can do about that. But without looking at that code, it's either a case of I didn't copy and paste all of it properly, yep, or I just needed to remove a line.
Right. So there's no specific mechanisms that you're really aware of that they can deploy that would, yeah.
No, there's no protection against it. Simply because all I'm doing is I'm taking the source code and the base hypertext reference for the site. And for a site to display in your web browser, it needs to allow me to pull the code down and the images into my browser. So all I'm doing is adding a tag into the code, putting it on another website, and the original website just sees it as somebody browsing the site. Can't tell the difference. Yeah. So that's why spoofing a site is seconds. You know, it's super simple stuff. Yeah, it's dangerous, but.
And if I may abuse my chair one more time, I'm really fascinated by this whole piece around pretext and conditioning. If we're sort of, at the root of it, there's this social conditioning that has been inbred into us from the time that we're young children. I'm curious to know how much of these ploys really build off of marketing schemes, or if you could provide any more additional color into the sort of background history into how phishing evolves. Because as you said, it's sometimes sophisticated, it's sometimes not. There's often misspelling, but then they deploy these other really sophisticated selling tactics within it. Do you have any additional context to add to that?
Yeah, certainly. It's not new, and the marketing departments are social engineers. Simple as that. They know these tricks. They know they're trying to gain your trust, and they're trying to gain your compliance by saying, hey, look at us. Here's the benefit. Trust us. Go and buy our product. Marketing departments are expert social engineers, absolutely expert. But if we look at it, phishing is a relatively new term, 24, 25 years old, but the techniques have been around for thousands and thousands of years. We used to call these people con men or women. Going knocking on doors, Say, hey, I'm selling encyclopedias or whatever. Now, obviously, in the context of those days, going around knocking on doors, that's kind of a lengthy process, right? You know, you're going to have to knock on 100 doors before you can scam someone with your fake encyclopedias or your non-existent. Timeshares were a great one back in the day, in the kind of like the 70s, 80s. Timeshares, same thing. Pretexting, getting people in the room, gaining their compliance with a sunken cost fallacy. So you invite people in, you give them lunch, you give them some drinks, you're gaining their compliance because they now owe you something. And then they can shut the doors and keep you there while they pitch at you, their timeshare scams. The techniques have been around for thousands of years. The only change now is that we can mass hit hundreds of thousands of people in seconds. We don't have to go and knock on doors, right? Well, I'm not saying me, because I'm kind of implicating that I'm a Fisher, but the bad guys out there, they can hit a global audience in seconds now, rather than traveling town to town with a bunch of fake goods in the back. So techniques are no different. They're just the delivery mechanism has evolved. And around the whole sort of pretexting concept, these are really that terminology really comes from the Rainbow book series. Don't look them up if you don't really want to get deep into conspiracy theory stuff, because some of them are crazy. The Rainbow book series are a US military series. You've got the orange book, the purple book. The white book is insane, by the way, completely nuts. Psychological ops manual. You can find copies of them online. There's a lot of nut stuff in there, but there's also a lot of the psychological ops bits are really just looking at how do con men con. And how do we use this knowledge? And if you look at wartime campaigns as well, pretexting around mass leaflet droppings, for example. Same technique, airdropping leaflets into enemy zones. And there's quite a funny one in, I think it was Vietnam in the 60s, where the US military dropped prophylactics, for want of a better word, into Vietnamese territory, but they were huge. And they said for US military personnel only. And they're like, great big things to kind of intimidate the enemy. So that's another kind of pretexting. But the techniques have been around for thousands of years. If you go back and read old classics, you'll find examples of how characters are socially engineered. Or if you read any kind of history, looking at wars, Trojan horse, same thing. Compliance, trust and benefit. They say, here's a gift. Thanks, guys. Trust, can't see anybody around. They've all legged it. Benefit, hey, we get a nice big wooden horse. Yeah.
I think every single person on the call is now Googling Rainbow book series.
don't. Some of it is insane. You will wonder, whoa, wrote this stuff. It's kind of scary and crazy stuff, some of it. But a lot of it's very good. There's a lot of technical advice. It's where also quite a lot of security models were established in that era. So things like Clark Wilson models, which come from 1954, have a military background, and they're kind of sort of alluded to in that series of books, but they're not classified anymore. But it's a lot of reading, and it's kind of a lot of it's kind of nuts. So
yeah.
I mean, building on a lot of these cases, then I mean, I'm sure like everybody's here has heard of the Nigerian prince emails back in the early 2000s. I mean, are there any other famous kind of phishing schemes that have been out there that we've all probably come across or may come across in the future?
Yeah, well, the phishing schemes are it's hard for them to be famous now. The Nigerian prince was a bit of a trope, right? Because that was early days of phishing, or fairly early days of phishing, early 2000s. So that was that's remembered simply because it was quite prevalent at the time, and everybody got that email, right? Everybody got it, and probably still do. The thing with there are no real famous ones now because there are so many of them, so it's difficult for any of them to stand out like the Nigerian prince. Recent ones, the famous ones now really are the whaling ones, where organizations will finally, after a couple of years after a breach, will admit that the CISO or the CFO or somebody like that actually did fall for a scam. But because of the reputational damage, we quite often don't hear about the mechanics of somebody falling for a social engineering trick. And I'll give you a really famous one, give you a great one for social engineering. So you've all heard of Anonymous, right? There was a company in the US called HB Gary, and they were a cybersecurity organization, and they provided consultancy, and they had some kind of AI machine learning system in the background as well. And they were quite a big company, a multi-million-dollar company. The CEO, who's some kind of ex-spook in the US, stood up, this is at the height of the anonymous hacking, stood up and said, I've identified the members of Anonymous and I'm going to reveal who they are at DEF CON. Well, guess what happened to him? 48 hours later, his entire organization had been compromised, all of his emails published online, everything trashed, 48 hours. And they got in through a phone call. Now, this is anecdotal. I think we pretty much believe this. But a girl who we can only call Alice, because we don't have another name for her, called up the server ops and said, I'm the executive assistant to the CEO. He needs access to this server right now. Can you give me the username and password? And guess what? She got it. And then they logged in as root into a bunch of Linux boxes and just trashed the lot. And that was social engineering. That's a phone call. And they were a cybersecurity company. Just goes to show, you know, it's really hard to defend against.
So, I mean, speaking of phone calls, then, is there the same level of risk if, say, like, I don't have a desktop or a laptop, and I pretty much solely operate out of my mobile? Is that the same level of risk? And similar to the ringing back to the early 2000s again, there was this whole campaign from Apple being, you know, more secure than Windows. Does that still ring true? You know, now that we've got Android devices as well now, I mean, is there more risk regarding what platform that you use, what system you use?
Well, all platforms are vulnerable, and to make a point, you can Google the Apple month of bugs. Because Apple were making, at that time, Apple were making a huge song and dance about, I think there's been some recent compromises in Windows and Android, and Apple went around saying, no, we're the most secure, we're the most secure. So a bunch of guys got together in France and spent a month finding 54 critical vulnerabilities in Apple OS. The only reason that they thought they were more secure is just because nobody pointed out the critical vulnerabilities in them, because it's a smaller user base. So if you look at the percentage of people, 80% of people on the planet use Android. 80% of phone users use Android. The vast majority of people use Windows. So where am I going to direct my efforts to? If I want to compromise your machine, I'm going to get it's worth more time finding bugs in Windows and exploiting those, because I've got a bigger audience and my bug is worth more. And that's simply why. And the Apple month of bugs really did prove that, you know, that they were no different to anybody else, just that nobody really paid enough attention to them at that time. So patch your stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we've got a quick question. It's more. I like to see it as a plug for Merimetso, which is there a Merimetso website? What's the best way to get in contact with you guys?
Yeah, sure. There is a Merimetso website. It's simply merimetso.net. As I speak now, we should have launched a new version by now, but it's been delayed a few days. There are contact details up there, which will go through to both UK and Australian offices. If you do need to get in touch, I think it's just contact@merimetso.net. We'll come through to the contact teams. He will get back to you. As I say, the website is first draft at the moment. We're getting it all redeveloped and redeployed, and it should be back up live with a lot more information on it in the next few days.
Thanks, Campbell. And so we've probably got time for another question or two, but just wanted to throw this one really quickly around. Given that we're slowly moving out of COVID, but I mean, during the pandemic, do you think that we experienced more attacks since we've had more time at home? We've been more exposed to an online environment? Yeah,
totally. Number of attacks, and the threat surface, as we call it, has increased exponentially. If you think about you're at your office and you're working from there, you're behind a corporate router, firewall, you're on a single IP address, typically for the whole building. You've got one point of attack outside of your email accounts. You move to home, you're now relying on domestic broadband security, which is not generally as strong. You're going to be using your home Wi-Fi, which is not generally as strong as corporate Wi-Fi solutions. So, you know, compromising Wi-Fi is a fairly trivial matter if it's just WPA2, pre-shared keys kind of thing. Capturing those, brute forcing handshakes and getting your Wi-Fi password, it's a matter of time, right? It's not a case of I can't be hacked. It's just a matter of if somebody's going to put enough effort into it. So we have seen a huge increase in phishing activity as well as due to COVID. Anything that's topical at the time in the news, you will find that that's where the phishing campaigns sort of focus their attention on, because you believe what you've heard. You know, if you've heard it before, you're more likely to believe it. So in the UK, we've got a huge problem with this track and trace monitoring, phishing scams and vishing scams, where people are phoning up and saying, yeah, I'm from the UK government track and trace team, or they're sending you emails. So whatever is current in the current climate. But also from working from home, you don't have immediate access to corporate security teams. They have less ability. If you're going direct out onto the internet and not via corporate VPN, you're not going to be protected by any intrusion detection and prevention systems that your corporate also has. So if you are working from home and they provide you a corporate VPN, do ensure that it's on all the time. Try to use a separate machine for work than you do for home browsing, if at all possible as well.
Thank you very much. So just, I might, unless Stephenie, you've got a question, I might throw just one last one, which is around, so oftentimes we do see emails from, say, middle management or upper management that oftentimes resemble something around a phishing email. I mean, what are ways to kind of notice, to kind of respond to those, and what should we do if we receive those from, say, you know, one from upper management going, hey, I need you to sign this document right now, and it's just a link?
Yeah, well, that's suspicious straight away, right? Because if you know your chain of command, why is a C-suite person emailing down the chain to say, hey, sign a document? You know, you'd expect if it's from HR, okay, you know, you can phone them up. You're less likely to phone up somebody right up the chain if it's an immediate manager, of course. If you've got any suspicion whatsoever, verify. And it can just be a case of never reply to an email like that, forward it back to the person who you believe it originated from and say, just being careful, can you verify that you sent this link? It takes 2 seconds to do that and can protect you and your organization. But yeah, if you identify something suspicious, verify it. Yeah.
Great. And actually, sorry, I just had one more cheeky question around, do you think that, you know, given enough time, a lot of these phishing attempts will be kind of indistinguishable from the original product?
I think we're pretty much there already, actually. As I said, you know, the email example I showed you earlier from the Australian Tax Office, I've been using that format to test people's security for, you know, over 2 decades, right? And it still works now. People are just refining and refining. There's something you should always do is, you know, I showed you I could buy that domain, but there's a concept called domain squatting, whereby we buy similar domains. A scam I've used a lot in the past is where we just registered www.domainname.com and then change the font so you don't notice the lack of the dot in between the www and the domain. And so you've got to be hyper vigilant about stuff like that. Now, obviously I've been doing it a long time. I've developed quite a few tricks myself. I've seen a lot of tricks in phishing. It's indistinguishable. We're getting very close now. If you are doing, one of the things we do for testing your security, we make sure in any phishing emails we send that we leave a couple of mistakes. So we make, you know, the link might not be completely obvious, but it's still identifiable. We might put a spelling mistake in the subject or something like that, just to test to see if people are around suspicion. Because if you make your phishing campaign too good, you're going to have 100% success. However, that's because we're testing vigilance of the target audience. The bad guys out there, you still get the really poorly worded phishing emails with loads of spelling mistakes and errors in them. They're obvious, but those are becoming fewer and fewer and fewer. And we are kind of at the point now where I think they're pretty well indistinguishable. So users need to update their behavior. Accept it's okay to fail because they are so good. There's no shame in having clicked one, but act on it if you do. If you suddenly realize, oh, I shouldn't have done that, do something about it. And organizations out there, no penalty, no shame for those people for standing up and admitting to it, because they're not going to admit to it if they feel that it's going to be some kind of backlash or consequence for them. So there is a culture shift that needs to be adopted globally around sort of defending against phishing attacks.
Great, thank you so much, and I think you've wrapped that up perfectly, Campbell. So what I might take it to Steph if you want to mention a couple extra things before we wrap up for today.
Yeah, for sure. I just want to say a huge thank you to Campbell and to Merimetso for that session. I think I said this last week, but I've sat in on literally hundreds of these, and it's amazing how much knowledge you can learn. And today was no exception whatsoever. So thanks so much for the way you delivered that message. And I think my key takeaway was vigilance, vigilance, vigilance. Always take that second to say, is this 100% legit before you click on something? So thanks to Campbell. I think just to reiterate, the node is here to direct all the attendees on this call today to any of the guides that Campbell was talking about. We work very closely with the Australian government around delivering content that will help organizations uplift their business posture as it comes to cybersecurity. So the ISO that Campbell was talking about, the NIST framework, some of the other pieces as well, the essential 8 mitigation tactics. We're very happy to point you in that direction if you want to reach out to the cybersecurity node. And just a huge plug for Merimetso. They're one of our local cybersecurity companies. Feel free to reach out to them directly. They're doing fantastic work. As you can see, can really chat with you in the way that you need to hear about cybersecurity. It's not jargon. It's not going to be difficult to understand. And I think that's one of the most important things in cybersecurity is that people can say, okay, I get it. Now what do I need to do? So that's kind of the last words I've got today. Thanks, everyone.
Well, with that, I'll probably sign off. But before I do that, if I could ask everybody, I mentioned earlier where we're doing a bit of a poll. So if everybody can jump on menti.com again, plug in the code 445499 and the supplementary numbers of 25. Joking about that last part, but this is just to kind of gauge where you guys are at now. This is one simple question, and with that, I might leave it there. So my name is Charlton, and I'd like to say a very big thank you to Campbell and Stephenie for joining us today. So Campbell from Merimetso and Stephenie from the New South Wales Cybersecurity Innovation Node. Innovation Node, not intervention node. Sorry. And so I might leave it there for today. So thank you very much for joining us today, everybody, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks all.
Thank you.